following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Speak Up. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Medicaid expansion, but more we're going to be talking about the fraud that is happening on a regular basis in welfare. As our government grows and more money is put into these systems, there's more money that seems to be missing. Recently, we've seen $6 billion just totally unaccounted for by the feds. And if it's happening up on that level, it's also happening here in the state. And today I've invited Deb Shorter back on my show to talk about ripping off the mask of welfare, a book that you wrote. Welcome back.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. And the reason I wanted you to come back on the show, we want to talk a little bit about welfare. And you work for Health and Human Services. You were a caseworker.
Yes.
And in your experience, being a caseworker, you saw massive amounts of fraud, I would assume.
Masses of amounts of fraud, but in the places that I didn't expect it.
Such as?
Normally, I think people had it in their mind, and as did I, that TANF, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, and that would be the young mother with the child, and that she was abusing the system and the boyfriend. And sure, that happens, but that actually was where it happened the least. And where it happened the most was in disability cases. And, you know, it skyrockets our Medicaid costs. And these are people who are, the law allows people to work but be classified as disabled, which made no sense to me.
Okay.
Still doesn't make any sense to me because it's an oxymoron. And now bringing us into, you know, because it's been 2 years since my book, and now bringing us into, you know, where we are now with Obamacare and such, there's a huge concern that that's just going to keep blowing up and blowing up and blowing up until, you know, we can't afford it now.
Right.
And it's putting more and more people on the welfare rolls. And they don't want to call it that because welfare is a word that's bad and you're not supposed to use it. But everybody knows it as welfare, and welfare
Knows
always,
what is welfare?
They know assistance, any
Right.
kind of family assistance or any assistance is welfare. And unfortunately, because of that, they don't want to call it that anymore, the states and the government. They want to make that word get wiped out somewhere. And the truth is we are, you know, we're building a less stronger welfare state.
So would you consider the people that are against the Medicaid expansion evil?
Oh, God, no, I don't think anyone per se is evil, but against, you need to define against the Medicaid.
Well, Medicaid expansion, we just recently passed in the House and in the Senate, and it was signed into law by Governor Hassan, this expansion of Medicaid. There's this promise that somehow the federal government's miraculously going to fund this at 100%, and for 3 years, and then it'll sunset, I guess, after that. And if for some reason they don't fund it at 100%, which they won't.
That's why I was smiling.
They're not going to fund it. At 90%, we'll be able to get rid of the program. Now, it is supposed to help those that are hurting, the people that fall through the gaps. But we're talking, somebody was talking numbers of 50,000 plus people getting on Medicaid expansion. If that's the case, who's going to have the bravery to make this bill sunset? How can we afford this bill?
We can't afford it now, and it's just going to get larger and larger. Because what happens is if you go on the Obama website to sign up, you go through the entire process, and it will tell you whether you're in that eligibility area. And then when you go into that eligibility area, the people who would never be on services are being pushed
Into the service.
into the service, and they don't even want to be there.
Right. I've actually talked to former bankers that were laid off that said they did not qualify for Obamacare. You go into the Medicaid expansion. Wait a minute, you're creating a class of people to be dependent on the government.
And this is a class of people who don't want to be
Right.
dependent on the government. The other thing that it does is if you're within that level where you don't fit in, it's going to move you towards bankruptcy, because we're talking private insurance costs of more than a mortgage
Right.
monthly with huge, huge deductibles.
$12,000 deductibles. Usually
Yeah.
people are used to a $250, a $500, $1,000, $5,000 before you have to get into the copay or that is part of your cost. The higher the deductible, the lower the premium. If you have a high deductible of $12,000 and a premium of say $1,100,
That's not a low premium, though. That's a mortgage.
correct
For a lot of people.
And then before any coverage happens, you have to exhaust that $12,000.
So basically, you know, how the consumer is looking at it, and obviously the people who are being pushed into welfare, or the benefits of the state, which is where they don't want to be, they cannot afford to pay the $1,100 a month. They cannot afford to pay the deductibles, and now they're going to be penalized and fined for it. And what's going to happen sooner or later? If they can't afford the deductibles now, how are they going to afford the deductibles and the payment? It just doesn't make any sense. They're cornering the people who are working very, very hard, and they're going to put them in a system that they can't afford, and they're going to make this system enlarge itself, because this is what the long-term effect of what happens is. The person gets so frustrated and they get so close to bankruptcy financially that it's to their benefit to become disabled. Because if they become disabled, they can still work a minimum amount of hours, which never made any sense to me, but they're allowed to. And they actually will end up with better medical care, more foods, you know, they'll end up on food stamps. They're going to go all the way into the system. That's going to be the long-term effect
Is
of
this
what
the
they're
new
doing now.
American dream?
This is not the new American dream. This is the new American setup, because it's going to be so hard for the average person for the self-employed to stay working and keeping their companies going and keeping their businesses going. And they're going to be pushing everyone towards a larger medical situation in the country, and somebody's got to pay for that.
Can I ask a question? Why would the state want to push something like this? Why would they want to increase health and human services when they know there's fraud going on? Executives have to know there's a lot of waste in the
Because
system.
I think the clarity of the system is not, you know, people haven't really looked at what disability has done to this country as a whole. I talk a lot about this in my book, a lot about how we are actually, we're making welfare recipients instead of making America's people proud and working and sustainable and productive. We're moving them into the other range, and we're almost force-feeding it on them, and Obamacare is a perfect example of that. I talk a lot about this, and especially in the last chapter, I give 10 solutions. And I don't talk about the medical or the Obamacare, but I do talk about a society where we take people, and just because they can't afford a $1,100 a month payment and a $12,000 deductible, and someone gets sick, it's better to just throw the rag in and go get services. And they're going to be forced to do that. And it's going to make it's going to make the welfare rolls grow bigger and bigger and bigger. It won't be just medical that will be affected in the long term.
And of course, there'll be a level of fraud within the system as well.
Well, there's always going to be a level of fraud within the system. In my book, I talk a lot about the fraud that I talk about in my book is more about people saying, you know, I have ADHD and I can't work. Everyone has something to contribute.
Right.
And there's no contribution required, and no heartache. All you got to do is sign up.
Right, and so the only way to pay for this is to have an income tax. If you have an income tax,
This state will surely end up on an income tax.
and with that income tax, what will that do to businesses?
It's going to kill businesses because first of all, they can't afford the insurance. I think, well, at least in my opinion, it would have been better to go to the private insurance companies and try to create a more settlable, solid deal
Right.
where people could get affordable health care. Now they're being forced to either pay for enormous fees to be able to have medical. And the people who are owning the businesses certainly cannot afford for their customers, I mean their employees, to be making any leeway on having health care, because it's too much of a deductible with a payment.
Now, recently with this new passage of the Medicaid expansion, apparently Anthem Blue gets a good lion's share of the patients, but from what I understand, there are 10 hospitals in New Hampshire that are going to be excluded. Now, that doesn't seem like the American way to me. Now, how this, to me, it almost looks like it's cronyism, what's going on here. In that a few hospitals are going to benefit and 10 hospitals are not. They're picking winners and losers.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a monopoly, doesn't it?
Or fascism.
And they're moving, they want to control all of it. I think that's part of the problem with having too much government.
But see, in my opinion, years ago, 30 years ago, we were talking about this. We were talking about the PPOs and we were talking about the HMOs, and everybody was saying this is all going to lead to social medicine. And everybody was saying, you're crazy, you're hysterical, you're a nut, you're too conservative, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? We're here.
We're here.
And the government is picking winners and losers. And that was part of the problem. I used to listen to a talk show years ago, a guy named Gene Burns. He was in Massachusetts. He was I think he was a libertarian back then. And they were talking about the whole issue of healthcare way back when. And the problem was, it was Congress. Congress, for years, has been lobbying with the insurance companies. Little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. We're going to stop the competition here. We'll stop the competition here. We'll make it border unfriendly. Your insurance has to stick to New Hampshire. Your insurance has to stick to Massachusetts. No trading. Oh, that'll drive up the cost, and then it'll eventually break the system. That's what's happened.
I see, my biggest concern with all of this is even past that level, though, Kevin, because once you start creating a government that's running everything, you're creating a government state. So you're taking over people's choices.
Right.
And once you start doing that and you force them into choices that they would normally never be involved with, it's going to cause that whole balloon effect inside the Department of Health and Human Services, because that is going to be the refuge for everyone to go to. And Medicaid supplement is just the beginning of how that is going to be processed.
I'm curious. Have you heard from any of your friends? You're a former HHS. Are they on the Medicaid? Or are they going on to Obamacare? Or do they have their own special plan?
Well, our state is unionized, so they have their own special plan.
Oh, so the state workers don't have to go through what the rest of us have to go through?
No. Few adjustments, I believe, here and there, but not that I'm aware of.
Oh, that's interesting.
Not that I'm aware
I wonder
of.
if the average citizen knows that.
I'm sure the average citizen doesn't know that.
That's interesting.
But remember something, though. They're usually in jobs where if they were in the private sector, they would get paid a lot more money doing what they're doing. So that is one of the benefits for them. I was very fortunate when I worked there, we didn't pay for our medical. It was part of what we had. But as the state got involved more and more in it, we began to have to pay for it. And then it began the feeling of the client has it better than I do. That's what my biggest concern is that by doing all of this, they're actually moving these people towards being dependent on state and federal programming out of no choice of their own, because we're not talking about people in poverty or anything like that. We're actually making the system way bigger than it's necessary for it to be. And this is just going to blow the hell out of it.
I wonder if there's an influx of employees request to be part of Health and Human Services.
I'm sure that they will want to, and I believe that's part of the structured plan in the long term, but our problem is not going to be that. It's going to be that, okay, after the federal government says that they're going to pay 100% and they're going to be in it and they're going to do it, which we all know is bull. We all know that is not going to happen. Who is going to pay for this? Because you're going to push mom and pop out of the playing field.
Right.
They're not going to be part of it. So the self-employed people and the people who are, middle-class America will basically either jump the fence and go over to welfare rolls, or they're just going to take the penalties and keep going, keep trying to move themselves further up that line.
Right. Now, this should probably, if we don't have an income tax, obviously grandma's going to be paying a higher property tax. And if it does go to an income tax, I'm sure their what do you call it? Their income that is that doesn't move. What do you call that?
Unearned?
Yeah. Well, their interest that their earned interest.
Yeah.
That'll be taxed.
Yes, it will be.
It'll be taxed. So that means they're on a fixed income. Bread's going to go up. Their income is going to go down. Their taxes are going to go up.
This is already happening, though. With Obamacare, this is already happening.
And that's the problem. People have got to wake up because the time is short for this change to happen. They broke the system. They broke the system.
Yeah.
And then in doing so, they've created a leviathan, a beast that is hungry, and that hungry they're going to want our money. It's taking our freedom. It's taking our money.
This is just the first step towards it, though. The first step towards it is, to control how people deal with medical. Then your education, the core thing, the common core. I mean, it's all going into that process. And the only way that we are going to be able to change it is to put the right people into office.
Right.
People that are like-minded as the American citizen. It sometimes worries me that I feel like sometimes when people get into office, they get so far away from what they started out as.
Right.
We all have a growth period, but there comes a time when someone just has to stay where they are and be what we need.
Right.
Instead of always sort of on that roll around, this is great for my old clients on welfare because, they're getting an increase in food stamps, all their medical's paid for, they don't have to work, they have their disability, but they can get up every day, they do things that freak me out most of the time. I'm going out to cut a cord of wood. Well, if you can cut a cord of wood, you can work. It's just how we think. But we're going to push the guy who's working really hard.
Right.
We're going to push him out of the playing field, and we're going to push him into the welfare rolls because they're not going to be able to afford this medical. There's no way.
And it's frightening to think what's going on. Now, some of your coworkers must have seen a lot of fraud that was going on. What does that do to you when you come home?
Because it's not considered fraud. A lot of times it's not considered fraud. It's just policy has established it. So it's allowed in policy. Like the federal government allows someone to work while they're disabled. You're either disabled or you're not disabled. In my book, it's black or white. There is no gray there. You can either work or you can't.
Well, I used to sell disability insurance years ago, it was the thing that if you don't want to, most people are going to be disabled for at least 6 months out of their life, and you need that little backup pay.
These are people who are born. We have people on the flat rolls that are born into disability with parents who are claiming disability, and then they're going into adulthood as disabled. And you're picking up the whole boat. So basically, they're getting a pension because they're getting money for the rest of their life. They're getting medical, so they're getting better than we're getting on the people who are getting pensions and work their whole life. We're pushing more people into that bucket, and that worries me because sooner or later that tip has got to happen. Yeah. And then what happens? What happens when there's not enough money to provide any of this anymore, and you put everybody out of business, and now you've made them unemployed? It's almost like, are we going to become a welfare country? I mean, is that what we're headed towards?
It looks like it to me.
It's scary.
It looks like it to me. So how do people find your book?
It's online on Amazon, where every decent book is.
That's right. And the name of the book is?
Eye into Welfare, like an eyeball. It's a large eyeball with fire, as you can see.
It looks like, it actually looks like something out of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of a horror story.
The big eye looking at you.
Because it really was a horror story. And to burn the American money underneath it in the cover, I got a lot of comments about that, but I really felt strongly that people needed to know. That there's so much waste going on, but not only that, we're not just wasting money, we're wasting people.
Right.
We're taking away their pride and their earnability and their just success in their life.
It's a natural
and
resource
we're
that-
pocketing them into something that, you know, is just not right.
Now, were illegal aliens allowed to get onto this as well?
Well, you know, it's funny. I talk a little bit about that in my book because I have 13 different stories about different clients that come in and apply and what's the process. So I did one story on refugees, and it's not what you think it is. So I think it depends a lot, too, on which part of the country you're in. In New Hampshire, we had depot stations for quite a few years. So we ended up with a lot of people who were came from other countries that came to America. The majority of the people that I had actually went to work, and when they come here, they get temporary assistance.
Right.
So most of them did go out and go to work. However, as I was leaving, they caught on to the disability game.
Oh.
So then they started coming in and filing for disabilities, and you know,
Now that you're a
they're
naturalized
going on that.
citizen,
Yeah.
you can. Yeah, I actually knew of one family that they actually were in Rwanda, and they watched a lot of their family being butchered. Mm-hmm. And then they went to the Congo.
My lady's from Rwanda in my story.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, this family, you know, they had 5 children that lost a lot of their relatives, and you know they wandered around for about a year. I could see helping them. I can see it. I did help them. I gave them pots and pans and furniture.
Yeah.
Some of my clients helped them out. The churches helped them out. They got they spoke 5 languages. You know, Congo.
Yeah, they do. They speak a lot French. And yeah.
And so they weren't dumb. Mm-hmm. But they had to assimilate into the American culture. But I was a little surprised that, you know, what a typical, you know, how much it costs to assimilate a family like that. You know, it was like 50, 60, 100,000 per child, something like that, to assimilate that person. You know, I'm all for helping.
Lutherans in America, though, does a lot to help them. And they're supposed to pay back.
Okay.
They owe Lutherans back. It's not just given to them.
And they were a very nice family, but the bottom line is they're people that are, you know, they're struggling here. You know, naturally born. They're trying to make their way.
But we all are.
Yeah.
We all are, and I think we need to stop putting the definition. I mean, I understand what you're talking about there. I understand that a lot of people are under the impression that, you know, illegal immigrants, and that's what's happening in this country. I think we need to step back, one step back further, and say, wait a minute, what's going to happen to these illegal immigrants once they do start being part of the system? Because now we're bringing them in, they can get food stamps without, you know, all the mumbo jumbo, or the driver's license, whatever. Now you're adding another thing to that well.
Right.
And then Obamacare is going to add some more to that well. And before you know it, that well is just going to be flooding over.
I had Kimberly Moore on just recently. She was talking about that there's recent legislation right now considering that to give them free education in our colleges. I mean,
It was actually passed in the legislature. Yes, I had steam coming out. So.
Oh my. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. What are they thinking? What are they thinking?
Now it's going to go before the Senate, but now the Senate passed Obamacare, Medicaid expansion. So.
Yeah, what are they thinking? You know.
How does this benefit us?
None of this benefits us. And I don't mean us as people who are Americans, because, you know, your parents, I'm sure, came from another place, and my parents came from another place. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they have to be people. We shouldn't be helping people who are not helping the system. I talk a lot about contribution in my book. I actually go into depth about contribution in my book. Every single person has something to give. If we're going to be making this well, such a big well, then we need to look into how we can better disperse people's abilities.
So you got a plan to fix the system.
Oh, I got a plan to fix it in my book. It's like I give 10 ways to adjust it, and 10 ways that could be done in a very simple way. I don't get a lot of harassment back from it, which surprises me, because they read it and say, maybe you've got a point there. You know, maybe bringing it to a more local level so we're more aware of who's applying and who lives with who and who does what. Right. Maybe we need to ask for contribution, because you're right. Joe can't work, but Joe can go cut, 7 trees down and and
Community work or
yeah,
something.
you know, people need to contribute. And I worry about the whole insurance situation because it's gotten so big, and just like welfare, it's gotten so big that it's almost uncontrollable at this point. So what's wrong with pulling the reins back? What's wrong with sitting back for a little bit? New Hampshire's always been a pretty tolerable state as far as at least seeing other views
Right.
of what's going on in our communities. And maybe stepping back just a little bit. But making the well bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger is not going to help any of us.
It's like stepping.
It's going to bury us, because
Right.
sooner or later that well will break.
Yeah, it's
And
like
we'll all be in the fall.
I think it was one state rep said that we're going to be stepping into the abyss,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we have. But I still think there's time to heal this country. I still think we can.
Well,
turn
we
this
can't give up.
No, we can't. But we got to get involved. You got to get to the polls. You got to bring a friend to the polls, and their friend to the
And you
polls.
have to investigate the people that you're voting for.
Right.
I know it's funny, but my grandson had seen a sheet, you know, and he said, well, who are you going to be voting for? And I said, well, I'm going to vote. He said, I'm voting for this guy and this guy and this guy. And I thought, you know what? A lot of Americans actually do that. And, you know, he's only 6, but it was funny because I said to him, no, you won't. You need to know what these people are doing. You need to know, you know, what do they stand for before you just go putting your vote in. And the truth is it only takes a few minutes to find out, especially with the internet the way that we have it now, and things are so accessible.
There is a lot of false stuff out there too. I know
There
that
is.
they've got the enemies of one party will put in stuff about the other party, and it's war.
It is,
It's-
but we do need to vote.
Yeah.
It's hugely important. I think, you know, that Obama might have made it just because people showed up and just kept checking off that piece of paper.
Yeah.
Not really looking at what was going on as a whole. And I don't think we can expect everyone to be that well informed, but we can at least keep them somewhat informed.
With all the information that's out there on the web. Listen, the name of the book is,
Eye into Welfare.
and written by Deb Shorter, formerly a Health and Human Services caseworker. Please check out the book on Amazon.com. And is there a website people
Yeah,
can visit you?
DebShorter.com.
DebShorter.com. So visit her at DebShorter.com. And thank you very much for coming on and speak
Thank
up.
you. I appreciate it. I always have a good time with you.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Until next week, that's it for now. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak Up. We also want to thank our sponsor, Center for Redress of Grievances, LLC. You can reach them at www.centerforredress.com. If you want more information about Speak Up or want to be a guest, you have something to say, contact us at speakupnh@gmail.com. And thanks for watching. Until next week. Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.